So, thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transportation. Now, I did a poll at several different places and got different results, and I went with popular vote. It was either talking about Stephen Smith's report on Elevator, which is here, and that option one on one on Discord and lost on Twitter, but more people voted on Twitter. The other option is something that was the runner-up for what I should talk about last weekend, which is BRT and public transportation in developing world cities. Yeah, I might do elevators another time if there persists popular demand. The vote on Twitter was 60-40, which for things like this is not like that lopsided. Because like if I polled on Twitter, should I talk about how much do you love trains or do you love cars, and it's people who follow me, it's not going to be 60-40, it's going to be 90-10. Like it's only like 60-40 is a landslide in the context of an enduring political party system, in which the parties do shift their positions, their coalitions, their rhetoric, based on a situation in which 50% plus one runs the country and 50% minus one whines at the other people are running the country the wrong way. And yes, I'm aware that the United Kingdom is first past the post, and that's different. Nitpick noted. So anyway, so my starting point on BRT needs to be historic. So what is BRT, or bus rapid transit? And it's something that you can't really give a good definition for, unfortunately, because the most basic idea of BRT is attempting to provide a higher quality of public transport service than is provided by city buses, with a set of, I don't know what to call it. Methodology sounds too scientific, rather than this is not science, this is praxis. So let's define BRT as an attempt to provide a higher quality of transit service than the city bus along corridors or along routes where you would usually provide this by rail, but instead doing it on another kind of bus. So the features of BRT that I'm hanging on to are: it is supposed to be a substitute for trains in at least some sense, and it is supposed to be better than the city buses. The upshot is that the exact same system I would not necessarily characterize as BRT or not. Like a bus with certain features I might not characterize as BRT, relative to the rest of the transit network in the same city. And in particular, a lot of European bus enhancements that look like American BRT, I would not call BRT. Certainly not in English. BRT means bus rapid transit. This is why the substitution for trains is so important. This is why the history of the mode needs to begin with Curitiba, with the plan in Curitiba to not build a metro in the 1980s because Brazil was too poor. Not Brazil was too poor to afford it anywhere in Brazil, because I think they were already building the São Paulo and the Rio de Janeiro metros by then. Certainly these cities have metros. I think undersized for how big these cities are, but they have metros. But Curitiba, a much smaller city, did not have the budget for such a system. Uh, and So the plan was to build a metro, and then they uh, decided that they couldn't afford it and instead went with light rail. This being the 1980s, light rail was the rage in North America. And the mayor of Curitiba, generalize, would be familiar with that. He was a notable urbanist. So among the things he did was pedestrianization of city streets, and when drivers complained, he made sure to bring children. He made sure to get community members who were to bring like civil society leaders who were supportive of this, to bring children to play on the lanes that were about to be closed off to cars, so that drivers wouldn't drive into them as a form of driver civil disobedience. So Lerner needs to be understood, first of all, as a very, I don't want to say authoritarian leader, although at one point he was there at the behest of the junta. He was also elected in free elections, so it's not like he was some kind of junta imposition or purely a junta imposition, but he is a very top-down, I will decide and do things immediately type of leader. Things that I'm trying to think of good examples of such leadership in richer democracies. Certainly, someone like Mike Bloomberg portrays himself as that. To some extent, he was that with certain industrialization projects. Sorry, that was a friend from primary school who doesn't go online on weekdays. Okay, so you're telling me the U.S. should not build true BRT, and I'm gonna get to that. I'm giving you a story about something that specifying began in Brazil, and then the BRT system that is best known globally, other than Curitiba, just because Lerner was selling the system very aggressively globally. So people are very aware of him. Like, he does a lot of international urbanist consulting, which is, again, first of all, I'm not sure what to call it. Let's call it urbanist in the political sense. So urbanism can be an interest, right? I mean, urbanist is in I study cities, but it can also be a political stance. In the same way that you can call someone an Americanist, which is just a field of study. This is someone who studies American history or American sociology. It's a common thing to say Americanist, Asianist, Europeanist. Okay, I love you, but I mean, I'm on stream and I'm not going to go on Skype while it's streaming. Unless I have to. And so so urbanist can mean that, but it, unlike, let's say, Europeanist or Americanist or Asianist, also means a political stance, which is in favor of livable cities, generally against cars, or at least against cars as a dominant form of public transportation in and near city centers, and support for various alternatives, and also affirmative support for various alternatives to the car, which could be the subway, they could be just walking or biking, it could be scooters, whatever. Such urbanists are very common in this part of the world where I live, but here they usually back trams. And Lerner realized something, which is that they can do it with a bus. And then I don't know if it's the biggest system in the world by ridership, but the one that I think about the most and that I think most urbanists think about the most when they think about BRT is Transmilenio in Rota. And that too is notably pushed by Mayor and Enrique Peñalosa, who likewise is very aggressively pro-public transportation, to the point that there's a quote that I'm pretty sure is not his, but is, yes, Skype is still fine. There's a quote that I'm pretty sure is not his, but is often misattributed to him, and he clearly believes that, even if I don't think he's the first person who said that, which is, a rich city is not where, and yes, you can see two different incremental lines, is not where the poor have cars, it's where the rich have, it's where the rich use public transportation. So this is another mayor of Bogota, Gustavo Petro, but I've also seen this attributed to Peñalosa. So this is something that, okay, so now we're starting to talk about, I don't want to say rolling stock because I think it's only trains, not buses that use the expression rolling stock for the equipment, but the idea of BRT is, and again, I'm going to go through the process of what made it happen in Curitiba and then Bogota. I don't want to give abstract definitions beyond what I just said before about better than bus imitates a train. Curitiba has fairly wide streets. Not insanely wide. Bogota has some insanely wide streets, which they use to expand the capacity of the BRT network. So what they did is they set up dedicated lanes on the main streets of Curitiba, and I don't know the network map very well, so I'm not gonna I'm not gonna do what I think in a city that I'm much more familiar with, but just go with my mouse over and show you where the routes are. Maybe this is one of them, I'm not sure. Then, in imitation of metros, the stations are gated, so you have to pay to get to the bus station, to the bus stop rather than you pay when you get on the bus, so the bus can get in and out more quickly. Now, I'm used to proof of payment. Brazil is not. And again, in Bogota, the streets are insanely wide. I mean, not all of them, obviously, but enough of them are that they manage to do it not just that, but with 4 lanes. And once the system is built like this, they can even get buses that are dedicated to the system. So the buses can be bigger. So yeah, this is the line about biarticulated buses. I would not call it a tram on rubber tires. It is much smaller than a tram. A normal bus is 12 meters, and Arctic is, or an accordion bus, whatever you want to call it, is 18. And one with 2 accordion sections, so biarticulated, would be about 24. Trams go way above that. So for example, the Alstom Citadis goes into the 50s. And of course the ride quality on trains is better. And so why would they do such a thing? Here also note how much space this is using. This is the stations. The stations are island platforms. I don't know if that's also done in Curitiba, but it is how it's done in Bogota. And so they're island platforms, so the buses open their doors on the left side, not the right side, to the point that they have dedicated buses that only have left side doors, whereas usually the buses should have right side doors. Colombia, like all of Latin America, drives on the right, not on the British or the Indian. So what this means is that so it's a dedicated fleet. Now the American urbanist literature has started to adopt some BRT features, and then they use the expressions opened and closed BRT. So I'm describing to you a closed BRT system, one that uses buses that cannot run on normal city streets, because on normal city streets, the way it works is the bus stops at the curb, and therefore, in most of the world, the bus will have to have right side doors. Again, the United Kingdom, India, Japan, much of Africa, it would be the other way around. So there would be left side doors, and then with an island platform, it would be right side doors. So incompatible fleets. I don't know how well the bi-Arctics can navigate city streets that are not set up for BRT. There is a matter of street width. Now, if all of your streets are insanely wide, then it's not a problem. Again, I don't know Curitiba and I don't know Bogota well. Um, the uh, I mean, yeah, okay. The PCCs were half that, and the PCCs are very much a return with a V type of vehicle. Um, the light rail that Lerner and Curitiba rejected were not PCCs. But again, we're talking about things that happened in the 1980s, so by then they are aware of the light rail revolution of North America. I don't know how aware 1980s Lerner is about the German Stadtbahn revolution of the mostly 70s, but certainly he would be aware of the North American light rail revolution that the Stadtbahn revolution here inspired. Now, okay, Hikoki, yeah. Bummel's really terrible. Yeah, that's exactly right. The biggest argument, not the biggest, but one of the bigger arguments for riding trains and not buses is a train with space for 400 people and has one driver. A bus, even by Arctic, does not have space for 400. It has space for maybe 100. So to provide equivalent capacity, you need 4 times the drivers, and this is high end by Arctic. Usually, if you're doing single Arctics, it's 60, maybe 80. And the thing about buses is that standing on a bus is much less comfortable than standing on a train. One way to interpret it is buses have a higher seated to standing ratio, but it's not that buses magically have more space for seats, it's that standing on a bus really sucks. Sitting on a bus sucks too, but a little bit less so. But what if your trams had conductors? I'm trying not to think about the Netherlands right now. I'm trying very hard not to think about the Netherlands, the country where they just had to slow down their high-speed rail line to 80 kilometers an hour because of cracks discovered in the tracks, because apparently they don't do maintenance over there. I guess the Netherlands really is an English-speaking country. Anyway, so if you're 1980s Brazil, you can afford to pay 4 times the wage to a bus driver, versus 4 bus drivers rather than a train driver. That's going to be a noticeable item in your costs, but it's not going to be deadly. Now, the other thing that is why this was invented in Latin America is currency exchange issues. Latin America is an industrial importer. Now, increasingly, there is some offshoring from, I think, the United States mostly to parts of Latin America, and also Brazil has never had. But fundamentally, this is early in the 1980s, Latin America imported manufactured goods from richer countries, mostly the United States, I think to some extent Europe, but mostly the United States. So your buses get imported. This is true of, for example, Africa today. It's true of most of the developing world, now that China is climbing out of developing country status, and at this point it's solidly middle income, to the point that China kind of single-handedly abolished the distinction between I want to say the distinction between first and third world, but the expressions first, second, and third world or Cold War era. So I'm talking about the post-Cold War expression, in which first world gets mapped to be a synonym for developed country and third world for developing country. China kind of single-handedly abolished it, not because it's the only middle-income country, but because it's the biggest one, to the point that, how does it fall into this category, into this categorization? Yeah, exactly. In theory, on a normal bus, you get 40 seated and 40 standing. In practice, you get 40 seated and 10 who are standing, of whom several might not be throwing up. Trams with better ride quality is not your Amsterdam experience. It's my Berlin experience. It is my Boston experience. I mean, like, American bus ride quality is just terrible. It is better in Europe. I've sadly been on buses here. No, trams are not the equals of buses. They're much better. Um, so, like, there is a reason that in the United States, um, trams were replaced with buses in the 50s, and then some cities built light rail on some core corridors in the 1980s. And in both cases, ridership, ridership fell at bus institution and increased at rail institution. Now, in both cases, the trains were faster than the buses, but the ridership changes were much greater that could be explained based on speed. The impact of speed on ridership is well documented in the literature. You can actually net it out. So if it happens in one place, then that's an outlier, or two places, these are both outliers. If it happens consistently about rail versus bus, there is a rail bias in ridership. This is also something that counts. So we can talk about the history of why North America bus-instituted. And yeah, that's because there was a lot of deferred maintenance, especially because of, well, the war. So in the war, the maintenance workers were being drafted, or they're being drafted, or maybe not into the military, maybe they were being sent to war industries, or more often they were just doing mechanical work on, tanks. So that led to a lot of very intense deferred maintenance at a time of record usage of public transportation, because the United States in the 30s, in Canada even more so, was not that urbanized economy. Yeah, it was majority urbanized, but the United States during the Great Depression was 40% rural. So there was noticeable additional rural migration to these cities, and fuel was rationed. Obviously, no more people were buying new cars. So record public transportation usage without the ability to increase the provision of services in the sense of frequency, but not more maintenance. So 1946, 1947, 1948 rolls in, and these trams need to be replaced pronto. So that it would not surprise me if the 1990s Czechia or Hungary or Slovakia or Poland would have had the same problem. I remember when I was in Praga, I rode buses and I rode trams. I want to say that I think the trams were better, but I don't actually remember. In Leipzig, absolutely, that is the case. Yes. And you could have an entire conversation just about how, modern Hiroshima compares with post-apoc depictions of cities that have been nuked, because there's this mentality that if a city's been nuked, the area is permanently uninhabitable for millennia, and no. And if anything, thermonuclear weapons are less radiation-y than the fission bombs used in the war. In absolute terms, they produce more radiation, but they also produce much bigger destruction. When we're saying that hydrogen bombs are way less radiation-y than the fission bombs. So you'd expect that Hiroshima and Nagasaki would not be habitable if, any post-apoc lit were remotely realistic about what nuclear weapons do, but no. Maybe. Anyway, you can load more people into a BRT. Yeah, you can manage 200. You can also, manage 1.5 thousand people on a 150 meter train in New York City. If it's rush hour and it's a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 train from uptown to midtown, and the vagaries of inconsistent timetabling make it one of the busier trains. On average, the trains will have 1,300 rush hour per corona, but there is enough variability that you can see 1.5, 1.6. So, in theory, you can do it. In practice, Second Avenue subway was built for a reason. And that's on a train where the ride quality is rather good, and everything is optimized around a good standing experience, which is not at all the case for buses. Anyway, I started to talk about Latin America's economic status. So Latin America, especially in the 1980s, maybe we think of it as third world instead of being poor. But Latin America was not actually that poor. It was, in relative terms, what we would call middle income. So let's go to the World Bank, and it's going to be, and I'm going to do 1990 because that's when the time series starts. And I will tell you, don't 100% trust the 1990 numbers. These are so this is from 2021 PPPs, and the ability of PPPs to be comparable to past years decays over time. This is why when they moved from, I'm forgetting what year to what year, maybe 07 to 15, they cut the beginning year from 1980 to 1990. Because you can either try to optimize to get the economic growth right or the GDP levels right, and you would expect that in math terms the diagram would commute, but it doesn't. Anyway, so Brazil and Colombia, so first of all you can see that they've had garbage growth compared with the US. Colombia maybe not, but Brazil certainly. But second, Brazil and Colombia in 1990 are about 1/4 of the United States, which is, worse than China today, but not much worse than China today. So the upshot is that in the modern, like the 2010s schema of in order to replace developed and developing countries with high, middle, low income categories and interpolations, BRT was not invented by poor countries. It was invented by middle income countries. And a very specific kind of middle income countries are namely ones that had atypically strong currencies for their incomes. So, and this is where I'm going to be a neoliberal for a minute, and if you don't like it, well, tough, that's probably the part of neoliberalism that has held up the best. Latin America has stronger currencies relative to PPP than you would expect for their GDP per capita. Generally, richer countries in PPP terms, like purchasing power parity terms, in PPP terms, richer countries also have stronger currencies relative to PPP than poor countries. Why? Because PPPs are a basket of living expenses, and the poorer you are, the more your living expenses are staples that are either locally grown food or labor-intensive things like groceries. So so your ability to afford them is increased just because the place is poor, and so the upshot is that quite a lot of poor countries, and I don't mean disaster zones like the DRC. I mean, if you think Egypt, India, Bangladesh, so solidly like lower middle income places, they can have currencies that are in exchange rate terms maybe 1/3 their PPP value. I think we've seen 1/4. Latin America is not like that at all. Latin America generally has had strong currencies. Never stronger relative to PPP than the US dollar or these days the euro, nothing like that at all. But the PPP comparison has never been as brutal as in most countries of comparable income levels. So one of the points that I don't know if it is something that John Williamson himself came up with, but certainly it was in the 10-point Washington consensus that he proposed. And that is, you need to keep your currencies competitive, because if your currencies are overvalued, now the question is what is overvalued and what is undervalued. But I'm positing here that one way to say they're overvalued is stronger than you would expect relative to PPP for income level. That hurts exporters. So that means that it's harder for you to industrialize. It's harder for you because if you're a country like Brazil, you're not going to beat the United States or Germany on extremely high value added manufacturing. Like, yes, you can develop video games, and maybe these video games can be very successful, but that's never something that happens at scale. That can happen to an indie. If you're trying to be the next Ubisoft, well, you're probably going to end up being a French company, or a Japanese company, or an American company, or a Chinese company. So you need to be able to use labor-intensive, low-wage production. And of course, when it comes to export, nobody gives a shit about low wages compared with living costs. They care about low wages compared with international currency movements. So you want your currency to be weak, to the point that one way that countries try to prop up their both their exports and their domestic industries that compete with imports is to weaken the currency. In China, that was like very severe currency manipulation, keeping the yuan weaker than it should be relative to PPP. And not just relative to PPP, also relative to expected growth. Like if your economic growth is high, and if your not relevant to China but to other countries, population growth is high, then the currency should be stronger, all else being equal, because people will want to invest in your country. The upshot is that in Latin America, policies have led to stronger currencies than probably was optimal. This is not, and often this was left-wing governments. Like in Argentina, the idea is that if you keep the currency strong, then it's going to be easier for people to afford imports, and that's good for consumers. So essentially, the left in Argentina has always tried to keep the currency stronger, and the right maybe tries to make it weaker because neoliberals tell it to do so. Like, I don't think it's some kind of specific interest group of exporters or import competing industries. And now, this is not just a left-wing thing, because in the United States, Reagan was this is different. No, Germany did not manipulate the currency. The Bundesbank, aka the ECB, just weakened the economy. I mean, having a weak economy is not currency manipulation, that's just bad economic policy. However, Ronald Reagan, about Bassaboom. Anyway, so Reagan actually had strong dollar policies, which was critiqued in real time in the 1980s for accelerating the deindustrialization of the United States. At the time, the fear was not being outcompeted by poorer countries racing their nets to the bottom, like Mexico. That was a big thing during and after NAFTA. Rather, it was about Japan racing the United States to the top, with lower incomes than the United States, but very rapid convergence. Convergence that was also in productivity, whereas, for example, the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s was growing much faster than the United States, but American economists, after initially being spooked by this, started breaking this down and realized that it was just completing the process of urbanization and industrialization, and total factor productivity in the USSR was not actually gaining on the US, maybe even to the contrary. In Japan, so armed with the same tools, they found that Japan genuinely is converging to the United States and may overtake it, which of course never did. But in the United States, the policies of Reagan led to a strong dollar because of the combination of tax cuts. Tax cuts stimulate consumption. So a Latin American leftist will try to stimulate the consumption of poor people. Reagan, was trying to stimulate the consumption of rich people. That's where the concept of trickle-down economics originated, was that the idea that if you give tax cuts to wealthy people, they're going to spend their money on things that are going to require the labor of the, let's say, bottom half of the income distribution. So the stimulus would trickle down to poor people. Now, the tax cuts were not accompanied by sufficient spending cuts. There were some spending cuts, but Reagan is not Thatcher. Or more importantly, the United States up until Reagan was not the United Kingdom up until Maggie. I mean, 1978, Britain has inequality that's like higher than maybe Nordics then, lower than Nordics now. I think maybe equivalent to maybe even better than the Netherlands or Germany, much better than France, which never was that social. And then, Thatcher had a large, if not Nordic, welfare state to cut. Reagan did not. So Reagan led to an explosion of deficits, and because at the time there was also high inflation, the Federal Reserve kept rates high. So the combo of tax cuts stimulating consumption and high interest rates stimulating foreign investment kind of wrecked the industrial economy. So Latin America essentially had the same kind of thing. Persistently high deficits, no real willingness to engage in any kind of long-term austerity, which could fall on the rich or the poor. For example, Hollande tried to make the austerity fall on the rich. I mean, he failed, but he tried. So the point of all of this is buses are an imported good. And if you're Latin America in the 80s, you have an economic policy that restrains your long-term growth. You saw it showed you on the World Bank stats for Brazilian and Colombian GDP per capita, and Brazil's divergence from the United States. Like Brazil's growth is lower, like long-term, than that of the United States. It should be higher for converters. And but this does mean that you can afford imports, and so in this case, the cost of the equipment is not that bad. And that's the important thing. With BRT, there is a difference between buses and trains in that the costs of buses are more labor and less capital. So if you're a rich place, you should not use buses as a substitute for rail capacity. Where should you be using buses? Well, if you can't justify a train based on ridership. What counts as justified based on ridership depends on local costs, on local population density, job density. Any first world city that has the population density and job centralization of a traditional middle income city should basically build rail network. It's something that doesn't really exist. Middle income levels of job centralization and population density with high incomes, unless you've already built the rail network, because if you have high incomes, people don't want to get stuck in traffic, so they're going to suburbanize, and employers are also going to suburbanize. So if it hasn't happened, it's because the rail network has already been built. But the point is that you should be doing more trains. Now, I've been looking at Paris. Not recently, years ago. I lived there for 2 years and 4 months. And because at the time I was living in a large city with a rather healthy public transportation construction program, by which I mean Grand Paris Express, but not just. It was kind of cool living in a city where I was looking at a map and saying, oh, let's cry on these things. These look like the highest priorities. And then I was checking in, they were either in planning or already under construction. And bear in mind, Stockholm has a pretty healthy program too, but Stockholm is a small city, very small city. And before Stockholm, I was in Vancouver. It's North American construction cost hell. And anyway, in Paris, They do add buses, and I think they even call them BRT in America. Like they use the letters BRT. It's kind of an international acronym, but in French they don't call it anything about rapid transit. Rapid transit is a very American term. I don't think I've seen it in the UK. I've seen it in the US and Canada, but anyway in French it's called bus au niveau de service, like bus at a high service level, because it's not a substitute for a metro. You can do enhanced buses, which come into several flavors because you're not doing closed BRT, because you're not trying to make it an ersatz light rail system. In France, you just build light rail. In Germany, you just build light rail. It's called, Stadt- or Straßenbahn, but it's light rail. And so, the upshot is that, yes, there's one decade in which the UK was mean on capital funding, and that decade wrecked the ability to build in subsequent decades. But anyway, so the point is that there's a reason I'm defining BRT as an attempt to substitute. I shouldn't say an attempt. As substituting, like, the things that you would do is better than the bus system, as but imitating, but not actually doing trains, because you're spending on labor to avoid spending on capital. The labor being that of the bus drivers and the maintenance workers. Buses are higher maintenance than trains, but then you don't need to import trains, and you certainly don't need to deal with any kind of expensive capital machinery required. With expensive capital machinery required to get spare parts for them, and so on. And now, of course, this is capital, so it's easier to do in, let's say, Latin America than in places with weaker currencies, but that's still something you're paying in local incomes. And the point is that bus driver wages and bus maintenance worker wages, you're not paying them in international dollars, you're paying them in local currency. So that is easier when you're poor. But again, it's better to be poor with it's better to be poor with a strong currency for this, which again is going to wreck your economy. But it's but otherwise you're going to have problems when you import, and that is a problem that we're seeing in very poor places. So I'm thinking of Africa, and specifically Dar es Salaam. So Dar es Salaam has a BRT network where they bought Chinese buses. Now, I don't know if China still manipulates its currency. The yuan is weaker than the US relative to PPP, but it's not that much weaker. It's a solidly middle-income country with a enormous industrial sector and expectations of future growth, to the point that they are starting to export capital. They're starting to export capital rather than import it. And so what they're doing is maybe they're doing loans to poor countries, the Belt and Road Initiative. But anyway, the point is that these are still expensive imports at this point for a place with a very weak currency. And let's just see how brutal the PPP conversion is in Tanzania. So I've never found better sources than just comparing this number and this number. So this is a factor of a bit less than 3, which is rather brutal. I mean, there are more brutal things than that, but that's still pretty bad. And what this means is that just buying the buses for the Dar es Salaam BRT cost an appreciable fraction of the cost of the system. And as a result, that drove up the cost of the system to the lower end of light rail levels in PPP terms. And remember, I just showed you what the GDP per capita is in Tanzania. They cannot afford to pay French light rail costs. And I'm not talking about American ones. I mean, let's not talk about like that kind of failure. But I mean, France, yeah, it's building light rail. Insurances are much smaller than DAR, but also France has, in PPP terms, 15 times the GDP per capita of Tanzania. And again, maybe somewhat higher light rail construction costs than per kilometer than DAR's BRT construction and bus acquisition costs. I mean, sure, but okay, so you have a long-term maintenance agreement, but then you're locking yourself to, again, to foreign expertise. Whereas what you want is to be able to do local maintenance, and yeah, there are gonna be screw-ups, but there are gonna be screw-ups either way. I don't think that these long-term maintenance agreements give you better maintenance. In all cases, I know in some cases that they do, because I know that the elevator maintenance contracts in the United States, they tend to suck if you're not just doing a purchase plus maintenance agreement with one of the standard elevator vendors, like the Kone, what was it? It's Kone, Otis, Schindler, and ThyssenKrupp, I think, are the big four. So if you do some trad boutique shop that's been supplying the New York City transit system and only them, then it's gonna suck. But that's New York, or that's just intra-first world stuff, and I don't think that in general you're getting better maintenance outcomes, especially in a much poorer country, if you're essentially locking yourself to working for a foreign corporation in a much richer country. Yeah, I said ThyssenKrupp. I don't think I even overpronounced the Y that much. So the maintenance agreements can actually kill you if you're in a much poorer country, or in a very different country from where the vendors are, because the vendors will structure the contract to their own safety, their own financial safety, and not yours. So, for example, it's going to be often priced in their currency, not yours. And that is always very dangerous. You're essentially borrowing in someone else's currency, which is something that you should never do, and that's not a neoliberal insight, that's, if anything, kind of counter-neoliberal insight in developing economics. Never borrow in someone else's currency. And yeah, so so essentially whenever you do that, you're ending up importing expensive foreign capital. In the same way that when India is building high-speed rail as a turnkey Shinkansen system, at no point does Japan Railways have any interest or any incentive in trying to modify any aspect of the system to take advantage of India's lower labor costs. They are never going to try to experiment in how to substitute labor for capital, because India is a much poorer country than Japan. If anything, they will try to make it as Japanese as possible, to the point that in India they're trying to, they need to train the train drivers for the high-speed rail that they're building between Mumbai, Surat, and Ahmedabad. The workers will be required to train in Japan. Now, the JR group workers will speak English. Will find people who speak English when dealing with Europeans, because in Europe you're studying Japanese if you're a weeb, not if you're trying to do any kind of engineering. But India, they can flex on, so what they said is that they're going to require the Indian train drivers to learn Japanese so that they can train in Japan. That's how inflexible that kind of turnkey system is, and this is also what's going to happen whenever you do long-term maintenance. So I have heard from other people, from a bunch of different sources, stories about maintainability of foreign infrastructure. And again, it's so there used to be Western things built in Africa that are not easy to maintain without Western expertise, and now it's Japanese and Chinese things where maybe maybe there's some kind of electronic system. Let's say display. I think one of the things I heard was display at a court. I mean, forgetting what sport. Maybe it was basketball, but I don't remember. Where the display was entirely in Chinese suddenly because there was some kind of computer crash, and the only way to troubleshoot it was to use the language in which that was written, which was not English but Chinese. Which why would anyone in I don't remember what country it was. I want to say Ghana, but I don't remember. I remember it was West Africa. I don't remember where in West Africa. Why would anyone speak Chinese as opposed to English, or maybe French if I'm misremembering it was Cote d'Ivoire. So it's that kind of maintainability problems. And now this does tell you, if you're a developing country, what you should be doing, which is do not get these combined contracts of maintenance and purchase. Just buy the vehicle, learn to maintain them yourself. You're like and you can't do tech transfers because China burned everyone on tech transfers. But things that let you maintain this yourself, that's not a tech transfer, that's just maintenance. There's enough of a global competitive market in rolling stock and in buses that you should be able to do that, I think. And when you don't, I mean, the result is that you're paying light rail prices for bus quality. And yeah, there's this pretense that the bus can be as good as the train. It isn't. No, seriously, the ride quality is much worse. The pollution levels are higher, and that does discourage people from wanting to relocate next to the corridor. That is a real problem. The stations. So I mean, what to do with stations depends on where you're learning from it. Often, if you're doing it from ITDP, which is trying to like ITDP essentially took what Lerner did, and is trying to export that kind of Latin American BRT to the point that they give you points for things that shouldn't matter, like island platforms. Like they're not saying you should have dedicated platforms. It's kind of stupid, but they can be island or side. If you have like two side platforms that are not the curb. Let's say the platform is the physical separation between the curb and between the BRT lanes and the general travel lanes. No, they're saying that they're giving you extra points if this is actually an island platform, and they do things like at the time I don't think there were any low floor buses, or if there were, certainly not in the American market. So what they ended up doing was they did high platforms, which isn't a terrible idea, to be honest. But it does lock you into a closed system, which is not what a bus at a high level of service would do. I mean, here, again, if you want something better than a bus, you have a train. And you could do investments that are in specific corridors that buses can go onto or off of. That's the open BRT model. Except by then you stop calling it BRT, and it's just improvements in one corridor that with buses that can go on and off. It's not going to be a substitute for a metro or a tram. No, here we just. I want to say here we build metros and trams, but in Germany they kind of don't. So let's say here is in Europe. And yeah, so so ITDP at any rate is trying to sell you that specific model, and again they keep saying buses are as good as trains because ITDP in the international, which again it's kind of weird that ITDP is doing things that are very different from what Lerner and the mayors of Bogota did, because in Curitiba and Bogota the main alternative was the car. Now ITDP is specifically selling itself as a global consultancy, and then it needs to compete with consultancies that sell other things, so that's when it's starting to trash metros, and say things like a bus is as good as a train. Again, no, it isn't. Bogota is about to build a metro. Okay, people are starting to ask questions. So, should a reorganization okay, yeah, so the other thing is, okay, it's a good question. So I didn't get to it yet, and but no, you're right, it's important. The other issue is that BRT in developing countries is not usually a substitute for or an upgrade for normal buses, or what in developed countries people think of as a normal bus. In the United States, sure. In the United States, there are places that have coped with bad construction costs and terrible ridership by saying that they can, instead of doing light rail, do a BRT, which has something called BRT creep, which means that the special features that distinguish the BRT from normal buses keep getting eroded. So you can have buses that don't have any features that are normal even on normal buses in Germany or in London. So you have things that, so you have buses that don't have outboard fare payment, buses that certainly don't have dedicated lanes. I don't think there's any modern North American BRT with physically separated lanes. That's considered something you do not do because of flexibility. The only place I know of in North America that has separated lanes, physically separated lanes for buses, is things that predate the modern BRT concept, like maybe it's a tram tunnel that was converted to buses in Providence, or the Lincoln Tunnel, the XBL. So you can think of it as open BRT, but that I would not call it BRT. I would not call it. It's not historically BRT. And anyway, so in developing countries, yeah, the history is that usually it's informal transit, so things like minivans, minibuses, jitneys. They have different names in each places. I think the best known ones are called matatu in Nairobi. And often what they end up doing, yeah, exactly. I mean, you can do it. So I mean, you're doing it for some reason. You just can't build a metro or light rail for whatever reason. That usually means just very low bus operator wages. Oh yeah. You're right. Sorry. Yes, you can do physically separated BRT if it is a former rail line. So, I mean, on street. Okay, let me amend that. There's no on street BRT that is physically separated because neither the tram tunnel in Providence nor the XBL. Maybe the XBL sort of is like an on street. Like, it's not like you take a wide street, of which the United States has many, and then you carve the middle 3 lanes into 2 raised curbs for boarding and 2 bus lanes. Like, that just does not happen. Or if you do that, it's rare, but it is done. It's not going to be physically separated. They're going to be painted, and then drivers are just going to constantly violate them. And if you suggest many kind of physical separation, but what if? But how can a bus take over another bus if it's broken down? I mean, get buses that don't break down. But anyway, no. That so we have so. Often what happens is that, and I know they did in Bogota, that they folded the jitney drivers into the system, which, so I don't know how contentious it was in Bogota. The issue is that the jitney drivers are not usually working for large hierarchical organizations. It's a lot of small businesses. Now, unfortunately, from within the queer community, my first instinct about it is the insanely unrealistic Sense8, the one that has a matatu owner operator who is like a dirt poor urban slum dweller trying to give his mother AIDS medications, which are in fact free in Nairobi at a hospital. And an owner operator of a matatu, like, feeding a large family. comfortably. No, seriously, small business owners are not the same as workers. Challenge level impossible. Um, and but anyway, um, so folding these into the formal system has the potential to be incredibly contentious. Again, I don't know the history of this in Bogota well enough to know what they did to fold this, to formalize this. Marta, are you doing the open maths analogy about what Ari said about City Fast Track, or about um, or about like the only television show that shows trans people being kick-ass, like being grossly wrong on matatu driver wages and the availability of AIDS medication in Kenya? Because I can see it go either way. Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, no, that's just a general problem of any depictions of like normal oppressed people or normal poor people in media, that they're just incapable of depicting them as workers. Like it's always an embarrassed small business owner. And apparently it's not just an American thing, because the anime that I grew up watching, which is called Heart in Hebrew and 3,000 Leagues in Search of Mother in Japanese, apparently the poor family has a father who's like hospital manager or something, who is voluntarily poor because he's like helping poor people or something. And the brother who actually is a worker is conveniently gotten rid of. But yeah, no. So the contention. So again, I don't know how contentious this process is. But yeah, this is something that I know was done as part of Transmilenio, folding these into the system. Now the big danger is that you're trying to eliminate the jitneys for whatever reason without any kind of public transport, substitute. This is something that a bunch of cities try to do, and sometimes they even succeed. For example, Lagos tried to get rid of the Danfos. Kuala Lumpur successfully managed to regulate the jitneys, that they don't remember the local name of, out of existence, because the elite drives, so the elite does not like having bigger vehicles in them on the road. And in Malaysia, there was also industrial policy. They tried to create more demand for the state-owned car company, and how successful this was. Quick note: can anyone name a Malaysian car brand? Because Korean ones, the ones that suppress local consumption to just export. We can name a bunch of Korean cars. Can you name a Malaysian car? Because I can't. And I lived in Singapore. Oh, they called it matatu in Kigali as well. I thought it was just a Kenya. Oh, okay. So in Kigali they already consolidated them into big businesses. So I actually don't know how it's working in Kigali. I'm actually kind of curious whether they're doing BRT as a competition with that, or whether they're trying to make BRT kind of an evolution of these. They tried to Lagos tried eliminating the Danfos. Okay. No, Lagos tried to eliminate the Danfo. There was just, it didn't work. Like, I'm not saying that they did it and then the results were bad. I think they tried and then it just didn't happen. I'm forgetting why, either backlash or because they realized, oh shit, all of these people need to get to work to clean our toilets. So we need to let them keep having their silly little minibuses, I think is what happened. And so yeah, so anyway, yeah, no, the jitneys are incredibly unpopular, especially if it's owner-operators. They also drive like mad. That legitimately is a problem. It takes a lot of training to to get bus drivers to be I guess, sufficiently alienated from the question of whether they're going to get somewhere on time, that they're going to not violate traffic laws, while also sufficiently interested in the company's general well-being that they will not park the bus, go grab food, delay the passengers 20 minutes, which absolutely happens in the United States from time to time. No love for South Africa bus cartels. South Africa transportation is just sad. It's just sad. Yes. I mean, okay, so Korea. So Korea built a metro. So yeah, Seoul built a metro in the 70s. By which point Korea was still a poor country, but I guess in modern terms it would be called low or middle income and not low income. And I mean Seoul was also very big. Yeah, in general, commuter rail opens with the rich. It's not just an Americanism. So the city S-Bahn begins with improvements in commuter rail service to a set of rich suburbs of Zürich on a line that did not have much freight, or maybe any freight, or intercity. I believe it is right bank of Lake Zürich. I think it's this one, where they began by running EMUs at high frequency. They just never figured out the American trick of running zonal expresses and only running peak service. So the same system became useful for other people. Berlin, by the way, same thing. The first line outside the city core that was electrified was the Wannsee-Bahn. And then when the north-south tunnel was completed, the start of the war, they connected this line, they permanently paired this line with the Oranienburg, just because Wannsee was a very elite suburb, so there was early suburbanization there, so quite a lot of commuters. It's just that, again, that the Berlin S-Bahn and the Zürich S-Bahn systems were set up in a way that then made them useful for everyone, and not just for the sort of people who live in Wannsee. And one house has the person probably who runs hospitals. One has the house of the manager at IG Farben, and one has the house of senior Nazi. So people are not just these. Whereas in the United States, they kind of locked themselves into a system that would only have been useful to that group. Malta is also tiny. So Valletta is not a large city. So I think that matters. That Dar is a much larger city than all of them. Thoughts about the Abidjan metro? Yeah, okay, so speaking about rail, so because I don't know Abidjan at all, I will say that one of the problems of Latin American metros, I mean, okay, Jaime Lerner is the mayor of Curitiba in the 1980s. Nobody has heard of the city. Nobody has any reason to give a fuck what the man says about transportation. So the reason he becomes a superstar is that Curitiba actually was successful at certain things, and that has to be understood as part of the failure of a bunch of Latin American, especially Brazilian metro projects, for which part of the reason is the alignments were too compromised, and often avoided city centers, just going for where the right-of-way was available. So you definitely want to make sure that the trains serve city center. You can create your own city center, but that requires a certain level of office growth, which you should not plan on doing. You should certainly not swerve around the old city center. Like, again, maybe you can create a junction somewhere else in the case. So I'm not going to talk about Abidjan, as I said, as well, but in Lagos, the metro has this problem where instead of going, so the city center is Lagos Island, and then the rest is, including the eastern part of Lagos Island, is residential, where very, very vaguely the island plus Lekki is rich people and this is poor people. Again, very, very vaguely, but I mean, this is the favorite corner. To the point they're building a new, I think mixed use, so not purely residential area here called Eco Atlantic. This is reclaimed from the sea. And it looks like the sea may reclaim it back in a couple generations, but evidently they built this. But anyway, the metro, it's at this point open. Instead of serving the core of Lagos Island, which we are here, they go around the edge in order to be able to build elevated, and then you can't build an elevated line on like this street. I mean, maybe some of the wider ones, but they're not sufficiently long and continuous for this to be as easy. I think it's still possible. I think they should have just bitten the bullet and built a subway. If you look at the elevation, this is not perfectly flat. This is like on the coast, but this is not all at sea level. Like Eco Atlantic, yes, but this is a historic part. So they could tunnel here, I think, or especially cut and cover, given Nigerian wages. Very advantageous to just do cut and cover, and not deal with TBMs. And if you need to carve new streets, New York did that in the 1910s. But instead they went like this. So they swerve to where a right-of-way for an elevator train is available because it's a very wide street, very auto-oriented. It's also going to not be good for ridership. You can see the land use here is not what I associate with high ridership metros, or with the center of a metropolitan area of 20 million people. And I'm counting Los Angeles in this. Los Angeles is a metropolitan area, maybe the size of Lagos, maybe a bit smaller. I think there's too much uncertainty in the size of Lagos to be certain. Now, LA absolutely has disgustingly oversized parking, like surface parking, but again, this is Lagos Island. Let's just go to LA and see how far out we need to go to get a parking lot, a surface parking lot that big. Because in downtown LA, I'm sure there's parking, but first of all, it's in structures, and second, this is downtown LA, thank you very much. Fuck you wide freeways, but land here actually is expensive. You want to get the giant parking lots, you need to go out of the zone. Here there's parking, but this is a structure. So when you compromise your alignments too much by avoiding spending, in the grand scheme of things, not that much money on a subway. Like the subway on L, construction cost ratio, is, it's there, but it's not horrible. Usually it's about 2 or 2.5 to 1. So they're saving. Okay, so this is up until here, up until Marina. This should have been done in tunnel. So we're talking. Those should have gone to the Marina, should have gone straight to the center. But anyway, we're talking 2-3 extra kilometers of tunnel. But it's around 20, I think 30 kilometers a system or something like that. If you can afford to build this much L, you can afford to build the last few kilometers in subway. That's not a big deal. Yeah, and the other thing that you need to avoid doing is outsource any kind of state planning capacity to a PPP. That's the bad part of neoliberalism. You want the state to actually be able to do things. Yeah, you can contract out, but don't do the thing. It's unfortunately also done in rich countries such as the United States, where maybe they want to upgrade the bus stops. They figured, maybe a lot of American cities, they figured out that bus stops that are a pole with the sign bus stop, and if you're lucky, a bus timetable, or maybe at this point a QR code that you can scan to look at the bus timetable for the stop. Very useful when sometimes my when sometimes I don't have working data on my phone. Uh, People in America anyway are figuring out that kind of is not the right way to do a bus stop. And other than this beautiful piece of art, this was intended as a bus shelter. You see the little flap? That's shade. This was widely mocked, very widely mocked. And now, in the adjacent city to LA, in Glendale, they did just do normal shelter as a city project for I think 8K per stop. But anyway, in a lot of American cities, instead of just doing that, they bundle it with a bus ad campaign, which is fine. Okay, you can generate more money through ad campaigns, but instead of doing a thing where the city builds bus stops and then contracts with an advertising agency to put ads on the bus stop, instead they outsource the entire process to the ad agency. And if the ad agency is responsible for the bus stops, and if there's any delay, the city can't build more bus stops, or maybe they can, they just don't want to. So that's an example of this kind of PPP privatization of planning that you should just never do. And yeah, it's very common in developing countries because when some IMF consultant tells them to do this, they're impressed. And then they wonder why they end up all begging to be able to immigrate to the countries that didn't do that. And the fact that it didn't, like, I don't get why they didn't build these stations. Like, the station construction costs above ground are not high. Like, the only time station construction costs are such a serious thing that you should ever consider building fewer of them is if you're doing deep boring, and this is not deep bored, and also can we talk about the stop spacing here? Stop spacing should generally depend on relative density. This is city center, so why? The red line. Yeah, the red line is one of these things that doesn't know if it's an S-Bahn or a metro because the red line is in the right of way of the mainline train. And honestly, I could see them trying to do an S-Bahn system. Why would you do a Talgo? I don't know. I mean, it's not really useful. Look at the right of way. So why would you optimize for tilting? You want the simplest thing so you can. So if you're not getting a good deal on something from Alstom, you can then go to Stadler, and if you're not getting a good deal from Stadler, you can go to CRRC. And if you're not getting a good deal from CRRC, you go to Hyundai Rotem. But it's kind of fallen into the metro, but it's pretending to be. Like, again, it's kind of a line that doesn't know what it wants to be. Last time Winter was very fun, and I'm happy that like the rock throwing on social media at least goes on like a bus stop concept rather than on a rando with 400 followers on Twitter who was being slightly more annoying than average in someone's outer. The other thing important, and it's good that you're mentioning this, both the Talgo example and the and for the PEPs, you do not want to be cutting edge on capital. Remember, these are all places where capital is disgustingly expensive and labor is disgustingly cheap. So India, which is a substantially wealthier country than anything between the Sahara and the Kalahari, with the exception of countries with like Equatorial Guinea, where the GDP per capita is a fake number. In India, maybe not now, but certainly the India of last decade was one where you could have like middle class families where one person becomes a doctor in India and the other person moves to Canada and becomes a taxi driver, and they're probably going to earn the same. It's possible that in exchange rate terms the taxi driver earns more. So if you're Dakar, if you're Abidjan, Accra, and specifically naming, so I don't know how clear it is, but like the income inequality. So the income inequality in Africa is very high in general, and both within and between countries. But I'm talking within countries. There are the more functional countries, again, the ones that are poorer than India, but I mean comparable maybe. So things like Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. I think Senegal's in that category. Ghana. And then there are the like sad disaster zones, things like the DRC, Niger, Mali, Chad. And so I'm mentioning the cities that are not the disaster zones. I'm mentioning the relatively functional cities, ones that possibly because of high inequality are comparable to mega cities in the poorer parts of Asia. So again, so like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, maybe the Philippines. And yeah, in those places you still have very cheap labor. You do not want to get to be anyone's technological experiment. You will not be able to maintain it. Instead, you want to be able to play the various people with butt hurt over losing the colonies against each other. So you want to be able to buy from as wide a variety of sources as possible. So you want to get your regulations in a way that lets you import from as many different vendors as possible. This is getting harder over time. The reason it's getting harder over time is that there's consolidation in the industry, which is the case in every industry. So for example, Alstom and Bombardier merged. So the European market, the European market is not shrinking, but it has fewer larger players. And yeah, sure, there are upstarts like Stadler, but Stadler doesn't make everything. Stadler, I think, mostly just makes mainline rail vehicles. I don't think they make that many trams. I don't think if there are any Stadler. I mean, I know they make U-Bahns, which are legally trams in Berlin, but I don't think I've ever seen a Stadler tram. But anyway, it's I mean there are other tram makers like Alstom, Bombardier, Norwich, and Siemens. But so you can't just buy European. You need to be able to buy European and Chinese. I mean, yeah, in the US people are concerned about great power competition with China. If you're an African country, you don't give a shit. Or rather, you should give a shit. A lot of these countries do give a shit on our China side, which leads to some hilarious things out there. But like you don't need to give a shit. You can just, but you do want to be able to buy from again CRRC, big European vendors, mid-sized European vendors, Rotem. If you can also buy Japanese, then great. If not, Japan is kind of its own island. Don't chase them. And this means not doing weird technological experiments that are going to be difficult to replicate. So shove it with the BEBs. Shove it with the tilting trains. I mean, in Europe, people barely buy tilting trains anymore. And I mean, Talgo, sure, but I mean, like the technology is just not that great. And sure, I mean, Italy, I think was good. I think Italy was right to experiment with the Pendolino. Switzerland was right to experiment with Pendolino. The experiment did not always succeed. They're mostly not doing tilting trains much anymore, but Italy, Switzerland, Germany are the countries that should be experimenting with this kind of technology. Maybe the answer is no, this is not the right technology. The right technology is 300, 320 kilometers an hour non-tilting trains on new lines. Sadly, Germany, certainly Switzerland, has not gotten the memo on that last bit. But, I mean, this is not a long rant about German underinvestment video, for the most part. Oh, there's a variable, okay. It doesn't matter if it was bought. I mean, WhatsApp is Facebook. Does tilting make sense in the context of the Tokaido Shinkansen? Yes. Again, if you're technologically cutting edge, you should be experimenting. Now, I'm not saying that all of your experiments should be foisted on the public without much testing, like the various AI assistants that all the big tech firms are doing to compete with OpenAI, the ones that tell you to what is the thing tell you to eat glue or to there was a specific thing that I thought it was the Google AI that told you to eat that is like obviously not edible. Oh, rocks, glue and pizza and rocks. Yeah, to get to choose to stick to the pizza. No, to be fair, I've had pizza that was bad enough that glue to get it to stick may have improved it. 99-cent pizza slices in New York are kind of a meme. But probably I would not suggest that for your long-term nutrition. Yeah, so in the same sense, don't make up technology to experiment on. But yeah, I mean, like it's not like the pendolino is not unsafe. The pendolino is just it's just expensive to maintain. And I mean, at the scale of Deutsche Bahn or what is it called? What does FS stand for? It's something. It's Ferro dello Stato. I mean, it's Trenitalia, but at the scale of Ferrovie dello Stato, or Deutsche Bahn, or JR Central or JR East. Yeah, you can experiment. Again, these are loaded companies. I mean, not saying they're massively profitable. I mean, JR Central is, but their scale is such that they can afford to do an experiment. The car can't. You're never going to, and the thing is, and this is something that generally bothers me with discourse about, I want to say developing countries, but I've seen Israel at least flirt with making the same error, and I see American cities flirt with the same error, which is the idea that if you are the launch customer for an experiment, that is going to give you development. No, it isn't. If you're the launch customer for some kind of technological experiment that succeeds, it's going to make the vendor very successful. So, speaking of Israel and thinking of experiments, the corona vaccinations, okay? I mean, corona vaccinations in early 2021 were universally available in one country, and that country was Israel because of some deal that the state made with Albert Bourla, with Pfizer. That meant that I think elderly people in Israel were vaccinated to a large extent by the end of 2020, and like universally by I think mid-January 2021. The friend that was buzzing me on Skype before, he got vaccinated February 2021. He is my age. I mean, that's how I know him. We went to school together. He is not in any kind of risk group. He got jabbed February 2021. So Israel was in many ways the launch customer. There's even an experiment that Israel participated in, which is, it was stated sometime I think in January 2021, was said that the BioNTech vaccine had to be kept at very low temperatures to be viable beyond a couple hours, like liquid nitrogen temperatures or something like that. And then they said in January that upon further study they realized that they do not need to be kept so cold. Maybe like a normal freezer would suffice. And knowing something about the country where that experiment happened, I can tell you how they figured that out. Even for participating in that experiment in ways that may not have been the most ethical, I shouldn't say maybe unethical. I mean, an Israeli hears that they need to keep things in liquid nitrogen temperatures and just put them in a freezer because it'll be okay. That's not unethical. That's just Israelis being slobs. That's Israel. But anyway, the point is that Israel did benefit from vaccinating early. That's not an experiment. The vaccines were known to be effective. That's why it took it, like from I mean the DNA like the chemical compound for it was synthesized in I think January 2020. But it took a while to confirm that it's a working vaccine. So that's not the experiment I'm talking about. But the point is that it's not like Israel became some kind of powerhouse of exporting vaccines or anything like that just because it was early. No, okay, it got vaccinated. A couple months later, the US and Europe got vaccinated, and the results have been very good for the vaccine vendors. People are in a bunch of ways. So obviously, like shows that the techniques that they're using, like viral vector for AstraZeneca and mRNA for BioNTech and Moderna, are good. So they're investing in these technologies and I'm hearing that there are good outcomes about like other things they're trying to, I don't know if cure, vaccinate against, or both, with these techniques. So it's good for the researchers, it's good for the vendors themselves because you don't need to look for some upstart that does mRNA because Moderna and BioNTech already exist. And I think it's also good for them in terms of regulations because it's, obviously the positions of big pharma are always that you should have weaker regulations, less red tape, and so they can say, oh, you see, you waived a lot of red tape in order to get this out faster, and the results were very good. So all this is very good for the vendors, but but what was essentially the launch customer is not benefiting from it. I mean, yeah, it benefited from the fact that it vaccinated early, and then, but it's not like that led to any long-term benefit in production. If anything, it actually, and this is again, despite the fact that because Israel was so early, they figured out things out early. I gave the example of Israeli sloppiness leading to understanding that, oh, actually you can just stick them in a freezer, it's much easier logistically. Or even the need for boosters. In early 2021, nobody knew that boosters would be needed. The mentality at the time was that if you were twice vaccinated, you would be completely good. And even when the first serious variant, the British variant, aka Alpha, was raging, I think that gets us to spring 21, it was believed that one course of two jabs fixes everything. And because Israel was vaccinated so early in the summer of 2021, the vaccine protection was already starting to wear off, and that's when people realized that they would need boosters. So Israel was boosted starting around then, and the rest of the developed world was boosted starting 6 months from when they got boosted. So from when they got two shots, so late 2021, early 2022. And again, and despite contributing to this as a guinea pig, and not even like a bad guinea pig, a guinea pig that got a vaccine that was known to be very useful early, Israel did not become some kind of big vaccination research center or anything like that. You don't gain anything from being the launch customer. Maybe you want to be the launch customer because in this case, it's a technology that you trust because again, so bear in mind, Corona was the first time mRNA was used in a vaccine. It was the first time viral vector was used in mass deployment. There had been, I think, 4 different vaccines before Corona that used viral vector, but I don't remember if none of them was ever deployed in practice or if they were deployed but only at very small scales. But it doesn't matter because, again, the year of research done this with very high intensity of funding, of effort, of regulatory sympathy. So by the end of 2020, I don't think anyone could reasonably say that, oh, these are experimental vaccines, what are they going to do to us? No, these were good vaccines. And it's good, again, to get them early, but you're not gaining anything from production. And so if you do anything that's experimental that you're not sure about, like maybe it's a kind of new technology that might lock you into something, don't do it. Don't goddamn do it. And this is the problem with, and this is the problem with anything that gets you vendor locked. Which vaccines, yeah. I think it was understood from basically day one that the Moderna and BioNTech vaccines were the same thing, so you're not vendor locked. And of course, by summer 2021, people experiment more and realize that you can even mix and match them with AstraZeneca. When there were memes about about trying to collect all of them as a kind of like you're playing a board game or a card game with victory points, and where something like a BEB or something that's very maintenance intensive, where you also have a long-term maintenance contract, that does vendor lock you. Because you're not going to be able to, I mean, yeah, of course the maintenance workers are going to be local, but they're going to be local and trained by the vendor for something that's very specific to the vendor, skipping steps that may be necessary for similar competing products. Not even because the vendor is deliberately trying to screw you over. Often it's just these vendors are not going to have, or the vendor in a developed country or in China is basically never going to treat you as a much poorer country as the peer. They're always going to treat you as something much lesser than themselves. And sometimes the contempt just drips from their mouth when they talk, but even when it doesn't, they will structure contracts in a way that kind of de-skills you. They will not trust your skills. And that's what you need to fight against. And again, you can do it with BRT, but you need local maintenance. And you can do it with metros, but again, local maintenance, by broadly, don't bother with special technology. And yeah, 27 million per kilometer in PPP terms, that's light rail cost. That's a French light rail cost. I can't tell whether it's a German light rail cost because German streetcars are usually put in peripheral places where they're cheaper. That's where you hear the 10 million euros a kilometer figure, which is also last decade on now. But yeah, that's plausibly something that I can see happen in a city street in Berlin that's not very central. And yeah, so the car can't afford that on a BRT, for example, and that's a big problem. By the way, are there questions before we break? Because people are already starting to ask questions in @replies. @replies, chat. @replies, I guess, is a text-based social media thing. So in Twitch, it's called chat. Yeah. So anyway, don't wait for the PPP partner to provide buses. Just buy buses. What about Korean or Taiwanese buses? Each of the 121 Arctics, 940 has to be exchange rate because 940 in PPP terms, that's insane. Like, I mean, it's like there would be 3 million or something in exchange rate, and obviously that's not what the bus costs. But I mean, honestly, even 940 for an Arctic in exchange rate terms, it's kind of bad. Like, I thought the Boris bus was like 300k pounds, and that was considered expensive. Like 350k quid, and that was considered expensive. What about Korean Taiwanese buses? I don't know. You mean like, are you asking me about companies that export? Because then I definitely don't know. Or are you asking me about how they locally do bus service in Seoul and Taipei? Because there I do know, not much, but more than about like names of companies that export buses from South Korea and Taiwan. Oh, their operational services. So I don't know their histories. What I know is that they are investing in this. They don't have very good bus rail integration. In Taipei, for example, they're on separate fare systems, the buses and the trains. They have. I thought Korea had good bus ridership, but it's being converted to rail. It's kind of a 1.5 world country situation. Where like Singapore was 25 years ago. I don't remember when rail ridership overtook bus ridership in Singapore, but that was either when I lived there or after I lived there. They do cool things in Seoul where the buses having different colors based on usage, which everyone likes and then wants to implement in their own city with, I want to say 1/10 the ridership of Seoul, but probably less than that, because Seoul is like 26 million people with suburbs and has a model split to 50%, and the people who see that and go, ooh, let's import that, are not in cities that have 50% model split. So maybe it's an American city that has 3 million people and 5% model split. So yeah, 1/100th. Yeah, no, that's in Paul Barker's scheme, new transit cities that transitioned there from being bus cities. Um, um, so in Taipei, I did see very wide roads that had bus lanes in the middle. I no longer remember what the stops were like. I want to say the stops were not islands, and it looked like it was open BRT to me, but I don't know. I did not actually ride buses in Taipei. I was there a week. I rode the MRT. Again, these are not, or this did not look like integrated networks. Like I imagine it's the same transit card and everything, but I don't think the fares are integrated. The buses are cheaper. I don't know if the fares were free. If not the fares were free, if the transfers were free. But anyway, yeah, and I need to drop as well. So thank you to Koki Koki. Do other people have questions? And sure. I'd love to do a Korea case. Or a Japan case. Ooh, thanks for watching. Yeah, but for 2 years I've been doing other things, and now we finally have funding to do more case studies. Which ones TBD, depends on what offers we get from other people, from like people wanting to work for us on this. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Thank you for bearing with me when I was ranting about experimentation in Corona. I think the neoliberalism thing is more on brand. So thank you for watching, and I will see you, I think, Tuesday, not in... do I put any credence in ITDP was funded by building like electrification? Not that I know of. I don't know, so I don't know who contributed to them, but like what they're trying to do is Latin American style BRT, where the origin story is not they don't like electrification, is they experimented and it succeeded, and they're trying to maybe push the same thing even in the United States, which is kind of insane given how different it is in, let's say, operator wages, or in the fact that none of the places in the United States that does BRT does so with the same anti-car ideology of either Curitiba or Bogota. And yeah, so, okay, is that Ben Ross? Yep. So, yeah, so there is a thing where in the United States, a lot of people are pushing BRT out of owning the libs on rail. That is absolutely a thing, and this is why I opened with the history of Lerner as an anti-car mayor. And obviously in the United States, there always has been the sentiment that buses are car friendlier because they use the same infrastructure as cars, to wit, roads. That predates the lobbies that Ben is talking about. That's more like road czars in the 1950s and 60s that liked buses as a way of moving more people on roads at busy times more efficiently, where road width was a real constraint. For example, city centers. Whereas trains, even streetcars, they viewed as something that used different infrastructure that they were competing with. But I don't think ITDP exists largely in an American context. Like it's trying to bring into this context something that has different origins. And yeah, of course, but in the United States, people like it because we don't need to build trains anymore. We can own the libs. But I don't think that this is a kind of advocacy that originates in owning the libs. Does that make sense? Um, do people have any last minute questions? Yeah. What's the link? Oh, 8 seconds. Right, this is the good internet connection at home. Alright. Thanks for the last minute question, Harry. That does make sense. It's a good kind of wrap up that ITDP in the United States is transplanting into a different context, which is why in the most similar macro region to the United States, which is to say Western Europe, they don't even call it BRT, they call it bus with high level of service. And then in Japan they do something very different with it. In Japan they use it as a train feeder, obviously in Europe as well. But again, the context for this is very different in places where you tell them what a line cook earns at a fast food joint in New York, and that person plausibly would be 95th percentile in their country. So anyway, thank you all for watching this. Even if I'm going outside of my geographical comfort zone, and I will see you again probably on Tuesday, not in a week. So thank you, or maybe also in a week, but certainly I tend to stream Tuesday. I have too many topics in the backlog. So thank you, and ciao ciao.